Feel free to check out my TeePublic after the video, and support me on Patreon. Watch till the end of the video for more. Welcome to my 55th anniversary retrospective of the entire Gamera series. Unlike History of Godzilla, where I uploaded a review every day for an entire month, this look back at Gamera will be weekly and divided into 4 parts, due to other commitments and some personal stuff. But anyway, let us celebrate everyone's favorite friend of all children and guardian of the universe, Gamera. Our story begins in the 1960s. At this point, Toho was a big name when it came to classic Japanese sci-fi. You had Rodan, the Mysterians, and more notably Godzilla, which kickstarted the tokusatsu and giant monster genres to greater heights, igniting an era that is famously known as the monster boom of the 60s. The same decade where both of the most popular monsters of all time crossed over in a very successful battle in King Kong vs. Godzilla. It was at this time in 1964, Daiei wanted to take on the king of the monsters with a creation of their own. Giant rats. Though it was made more as a response to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Yeah, Nezra was a film that got shut down by the health department and is receiving a film based around it sometime in the future by the same filmmakers behind The Great Buddha Arrival. It has nothing to do with Gamera, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. Anyway, in 1965, Gamera the Giant Monster was born as a response to Godzilla's ever-growing popularity. Directed by Noriaki Yuasa and written by Nissan Takahashi. It wasn't that good. The gist is that a plane that just so happens to be carrying a nuclear bomb crashes and awakens the prehistoric turtle monster Gamera, and it goes on a rampage in Japan. Overall, the film is really just a much more bland version of the original Godzilla, though in Gamera, despite featuring a monster resurrected from a radioactive incident, the nuclear themes feel very tacked on, and hardly do we ever see how the human characters are affected by what is supposed to be a tragedy, which made the original Godzilla so powerful to begin with. But we do have a band that plays while Gamera is attacking, as well as a subplot where a child thinks Gamera is his friend, and yeah. The film's lack of quality very likely has to do with how troubled its production was. The movie was on a very tight schedule, and it did not have that big of a budget, which caused the filmmakers to resort to using outdated equipment when filming. That, and according to interviews, not everyone got along well on set, including director Noriaki Yuasa and the producers at Daiei. Anyway, the original Gamera the Giant Monster is pretty forgettable. I don't really find anything noteworthy about it aside from the previously mentioned kid subplot, and the ending where they just shoot him into space. However, I'm fully aware of the cult following this film has, so if you enjoy it, then more power to you. I'd honestly kill to be in your shoes right now. Another thing to note is that this movie was released in America as Gamera the Invincible, with an extra M because gamma radiation? Like Gamera was born from gamma ray. Oh! But this was not the end for Gamera, as the film would surprisingly surpass Daiei's expectations in terms of box office performance. Just enough to warrant a sequel. And then came Gamera vs. Barugon, also known as War of the Monsters. Insert Baragon joke here. This time, Shigeo Tanaka would be in the director's chair, with Noriaki Yuasa being relegated to special effects director instead of Yonesaburo Tsukiji. It was originally meant to be a film titled Gamera vs. the Iceman, where Gamera would fight a race of aliens known as the Space Icemen on Mars. But the idea was split into Gamera vs. Barugon and Daimajin, likely due to budgetary reasons. This would mark Gamera's transition to color and the first time he'd fight another monster. It seems this time around, Daiei was able to step up their game, and it truly shows, as Gamera vs. Barugon was a big step in the right direction. Even though they're still trying to ape off the success of Godzilla, Gamera kind of established its own unique identity here, even if we're not at the turning point of the Showa series just yet. Instead of simply trying to be Godzilla, Gamera is just trying to be itself. A meteor strikes the rocket that was sending Gamera to Mars, allowing the monster to break free and return to Earth to take in resources. Meanwhile, a gang of criminals steal a massive opal from New Guinea, only for it to turn out to be the egg of the monster Barugon, who would eventually hatch from it. I like to think of it as a much more coherent version of the film Dogora, where the crime plot in that film feels very out of place and tacked on, whereas in Gamera vs. Barugon, it serves a great purpose to the overall story. And it certainly helps that the actors do deliver some fairly solid performances, and the overall tone is fairly consistent. And of course, we have to address Barugon, who has a fairly interesting design. I can't help but compare it to some of the kaiju from the early parts of the original Ultraman, where there was a decent amount of experimental kaiju designs with unique attributes to make them stand out, and Barugon certainly belongs in that category. Being a horned prehistoric lizard with the ability to fire death rainbows from its back and has a tongue similar to that of a frog. And it's also in this film where we're introduced to the standard battle routine throughout the Showa films, where Gamera loses the first encounter to his opponent, resulting in him retreating and eventually gets the upper hand after recovering. And on top of it, the set design is actually pretty good for the time. Other than that, the fights between Gamera and Barugon take a while to get going, and the final act of the film can be a drag. Plus, there's a surprising amount of references to World War II, which is only a reminder of what inspired these films in the first place. Overall, it's a fairly solid kaiju film. After Gamera vs. Barugon came Gamera vs. Gyaos, also known as Return of the Giant Monsters. This time, Yuasa returns as director, and the special effects are helmed by Kazufumi Fuji and Yuzo Kaneko. It's perhaps the most popular of the Showa films, and is the one that seems to get talked about the most, mainly because of how interesting of a monster Gyaos is. It has such a simple design, yet the sharp edges really give it so much personality. On top of being almost like a kaiju-sized vampire bat that shoots lasers. And this certainly makes for some interesting action sequences. In a way, the movie kind of follows similar beats as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, where the presence of Gyaos starts a ruckus and a team of men go investigate the mountain it's inhabiting. Funny, since Gyaos is widely considered to be Gamera's most iconic rival, like King Ghidorah to Godzilla. That and the scene where Gyaos emerges from a mountain is similar to Rodan's awakening in that same film. Gamera vs. Gyaos would also serve as a turning point for the Showa series of Gamera films, as it features a child as its main character, which would become a mainstay for the rest of this particular set of films, as Tokusatsu was starting to branch out to more demographics. While the story may not be as complex as Barugon's, Gamera vs. Gyaos' straightforward narrative does help it be entertaining and easy to follow. That and the effects and set pieces are still as good as ever. Plus, there's a decent amount of composite shots that don't look too bad actually. Just seeing Gyaos fly through the air is kinda chilling. Speaking of the air, Gamera and Gyaos duke it out in the skies, and it's just enjoyable. And that's the best way to describe Gamera vs. Gyaos. It's just a very enjoyable film, even if it can get silly. But that's just the charm of these films. Not trying to be overly ambitious or anything, just fun little monster romps. Gamera vs. Gyaos is a classic. Now onto Gamera vs. Virus, also known as Destroy All Planets. Can you guess which movie also came out around the same time? This one probably has one of the coolest title sequences ever made.
We found a deadly creature protecting the Earth. Its name is...
We're introduced to these two boys named Masao and Jim as they pull a prank on their scout leaders by mixing up the controls on a yellow submarine, insert Beatles reference here, only for them to take it on a joyride later, and see Gamera. Unfortunately, Gamera gets trapped in a force field created by the Virasians, who proceed to study Gamera. The studying in question involves a montage that recaps the last 3 Gamera films, which the length varies depending on which version you're watching. This leaves Gamera vulnerable to mind control, as the Virasians would use him to try and take over the Earth, while also exploiting his protective nature for children, by holding Masao and Jim captive on their ship. Their plans are eventually thwarted as the monster Virus would finally be unleashed as a final attempt to conquer the planet and fights Gamera. Despite some things I'll talk about later, there are some interesting things about the set design and effects. Virus is such an odd creature. Reminds me of Squidward if he was a kaiju.
What are those Neanderthals up to? Don't they know I'm busy spoiling myself?
And while Daiei is leaning more towards a younger demographic for these films, the fight between Gamera and Virus is pretty damn brutal. Sure, Gamera drags a helpless Byrogun into the ocean, causing him to melt, and Gyaos nearly slices Gamera's arm into sushi, but Virus stabs his head through Gamera's body multiple times, and it's really unnerving. Sure, it looks silly, but it gets more disturbing when you think about it more. Imagine being a kid and all of a sudden you watch your hero suffer from giant stab wounds in his body. What unfortunately brings down Gamera vs. Virus is the heavy use of stock footage during the action sequences, even going as far as to resort to using footage from the first black and white Gamera. Especially if you're marathoning these films like I did, you will be very compelled to simply just skip these scenes. And unfortunately, Daiei was starting to experience financial troubles, and these issues would bleed into the rest of the Showa films. And speaking of which, tune in next time where I cover the rest of the Showa era of Gamera. Hold on to your shells everyone, because Gamera's 55th anniversary celebration on this channel has only begun. And I want to give a very special thank you to everyone for 10,000 subscribers. I originally wasn't going to do a special because I had no idea what to come up with, or how long it would even take for me to reach 10,000. But here we are, and I cannot thank you all enough for your support for the past 4 years. If you like what you see, then definitely consider supporting me on Patreon, where for a single $1, your name can appear at the end of every future upload. Other than that, you can also get early access to videos, exclusive content, commissioned video requests, and receive a t-shirt of your choice from my TeePublic. Like this design that celebrates the 55 years of Gamera. Once I reach enough patrons, I'll review the Yokai Monsters trilogy, so if that's something you'd like to see, then go support me on Patreon. Feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and this is Titan Goji, signing off.